Well, hey guys and gals, Jack Spirko here. Just a quick video. I'm making this video to go along with a review of this particular salt here, but you can use this technique with any salt. In fact, for years and years and years, I generally did this with kosher salt. And the reason I did that is it's cheap, it works really well, and it does a good job. And my wife bought this for perceived health benefits, which I think are, well, you can read the write-up for why that's not what a lot of people think it is, but it is a good quality salt. And when she bought it, and I'll show you here, what it looks like. It is a natural salt product, and immediately I kind of fell in love with the flavor profile of it. But it's not expensive, but compared to plain Jane kosher salt, sure it is, right? I mean, kosher salt's stupid cheap. So I've always used it mostly for a finishing salt. What I mean by that is salt that you put on your food right before you eat it, because that's where you really taste the flavor of the salt. I'm also a big fan of dry brining meats. And that's what this video is really about, is how to dry brine your meat. And it produces an amazing result. Now, I'm going to be cooking these steaks today. My favorite way to do this, my favorite procedure, I guess, for doing this is to do what I'm going to do now, the day before I cook it, and let it sit in the refrigerator to dry brine for at least a 24-hour period. But even a few hours can make a big difference. I'm about to show you that now. Okay, so all three of these are ribeyes. These are, from a bigger cut of ribeye. They're all, I think, 10-ounce ribeyes from Butcher Box. So because this was a bit of a smaller cut, thicker steak, I'm eating this one. These are going to be great too. But if you look just right here at the difference in the coloration of the meat and the way that meat is textured, and you can see that it's much more moist on this side. That's because it's the downside. And you notice I have them on a rack sitting on a pan like this. And what I like to do is I like to let them, dry brine like this. And every so often, while that 24-hour period is going, flip them over so that the top gets a chance for more of that moisture to evaporate. But I would just submit that if you were in a store, even if they, it would have been great if I would have had these guys out this morning too. If they looked exactly the same as far as cuts and fat and marbling, you'd probably pick the one on the left. What I noticed when I started using this salt, again, it's Redmond Real Salt. This comes from mines in Utah. It's an ancient sea salt. You know what? All salt is ancient sea salt. The only question is whether it's been refined or not. That's where salt deposits come from, ancient sea ocean floor. Let me adjust this a little bit. You'd pick this piece of meat, and they're all beautiful, but you'd pick the deeper, darker red, because there's something that intrinsically we know about food visually as human beings. And it will cook nicer. Now, one important thing when you go to cook a steak like this, a grill, a flat top, frying pan, I don't care what, very, very small amount of oil or a fat like butter, or I actually a lot of times, see how thick that fat cap is right there? I'll actually trim that off because I'll never be able to cook this steak long enough to really make that fat have its full potential. And I'll cook that fat into little crunchies that I'll eat as a snack to reward myself for cooking food for everybody else. And then I'll take that fat and I'll use a little drizzle of its own fat in the pan and reserve whatever I don't use. Maybe you would take that too. I don't want to go in and take the fat out of the inside, but that's a pretty good chunk there that you could take just a little bit off of. And over time, you build up a little reserve of pure beef fat. Oh, fantastic. And you're able to fry that fat till it's, crispy and crunchy and delicious. And if you did that on the steak, it just wouldn't be very good. But the big thing was when I started using the Redmond salt, the meat got a deeper red to it, almost like it was being cured in the way that you think of like when you cure a ham or something, but it never got that extreme. And the way it happened is I was doing a really big pork shoulder and I wanted to dry brine it, and I did that one for 48 hours. And I used more than I'm going to use here because it's a much thicker piece of meat. And about one day into it, when I looked at it, I was like, oh my God. It was just a color I'd never seen happen before when you do this process. Before you ask, yes, you can do things like mix some of this with some garlic powder or something like that, or an herb mix or what have you to get some of that flavor into the meat. That's a good technique too. With beautiful ribeyes, the steak is the flavor. I just want to make it have its full potential. So the reason I did this is I know a lot of people, it's hard to understand how much you're talking about, because I can't tell you, use a teaspoon or use a tablespoon or a quarter teaspoon. You kind of do it by eye, but it's more than you would think, but it's not caked on. That's enough for one side. And do the other one. A little bit more. Okay. I'm going to flip them. Clean my hands off a little bit before I go back into the salt box. And again, I'm going to just about a steak this size, about 2 decent pinches. You notice I'm holding my hand high above the steak. That prevents you from getting it like caked in one spot. It lets you, kind of fill it out a little bit more. And now these will go back in the refrigerator till I cook tonight. And yes, this one will probably progress a little bit better. But I really didn't. Dorothy's not home. I'm making dinner when she comes home tonight. I really didn't have anybody here to help me out with the camera work, so I had to kind of make do with what I had. I didn't want to have to do any editing. But guys, give this, whether you try this brand of salt or not, give this a try. I do this, let me come back up here. I do this with chicken. People don't think you can dry brine a chicken. They're crazy, like especially thighs. If you're doing it with chicken, you're only gonna get so much of a response from the skin and the skin side. So make sure you do both sides and maybe go a little heavier on the non-skin side of like thighs or things like that. I've never tried to dry brine like a whole bird, but quartered out, parted out, just a fantastic improvement in flavor and texture. Pork begs you to do this. I do this with ribs. I do this with pork roast. Brisket, it's become my go-to. I used to be big on all kinds of special mixes and stuff with brisket. Now I dry brine the brisket and I mix up a basic herb crusting rub and I apply that right before I cook. One of the beautiful things about this technique is that it creates kind of a stickiness to it. So if it is something that's going to be smoked like a brisket or a pork shoulder, you just get a much better like adherence of the smoke itself to that meat, and you get that really beautiful crust. Prime rib, beautiful done this way because you get that gorgeous outer crust on it. Smoked prime rib, oh man, you got to give this a try. And what it's doing is pulling moisture out of the meat. And if you look, I'm guessing you can see right there, you can see water down in the pan. And that's because that steak's been sitting now, that one that I showed you, for about 4 hours. And it's actually pulled water out. And that's why I have it on this rack. I think a cooling rack for bread or for cookies or anything like that that'll fit in a regular sheet pan. That way you can put it in there and those drippings don't end up down on the bottom of your refrigerator. The other thing about it lets air flow around. I've seen people do this and they just put it on a plate or something like that, and then that meat's just kind of sitting in the water that's come off of it, and it doesn't get as well taken care of. Some people say, won't this make the meat dry? The moisture that you're looking for in a steak comes from fat, not water. When you are cooking a steak and you have water coming out of it while you're cooking, or it's wet when you put it down on the grill or down on a flat top or down in the pan, you end up boiling and you can't get that good Maillard reaction that gives you that sear when you have water. Like if you take a pan and put like a 1/4 inch of water in it, get it boiling super hot and throw a steak in it, it's not gonna sear, we know that. Well, just because the water's on the steak and instead of the pan doesn't mean that we don't have the same problem. So if you've ever had trouble getting a sear, this will help a lot because this will make sure you're really dry. And then the last thing, take some paper towel or a tea towel or something like that, and right before you cook it, make sure you completely dry off the surface, then do any additional seasonings you want. Again, I really recommend you give this stuff a shot, but you can do this with any salt. And I guarantee you this little simple thing, this one extra step that doesn't take any real work, will drastically improve the quality of your meat. Take care, guys. I'll be back with another video later on.